Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it may be for you. In today's video, we're going to continue the color study that we started before. Well, we're going to continue studying color. So yesterday's color study focused on the shapes for the portrait, and we used a different panel to do that. So today, what we have is the same palette. Remember, I'm using a piece of plastic that I spray painted the back of as my palette now. So what I did was I just took it off and I taped it onto one of my older palettes, the glass palette, so that we would have the same color scheme. So if you haven't seen yesterday's video, I would strongly recommend you watch yesterday's video so you can see how these colors were mixed. So today we're going to be looking at the large values in relation to one another, and I figured let's go ahead and work right on top of the value study painting that we created earlier, just to kind of cut back on time, and because it's just going to be much I think it's just going to be much better to do the color study right on top of the value study. So if you want to see how this painting was created, there is a video for that as well on my YouTube channel. I think that was last week's video, one of last week's videos or something like that. So anyway, we're going to use the same color palette. I'm not going to list them out again because I listed them out yesterday. And again, if you're new to this channel, you can always go ahead and scroll down to the description box below if you're curious as to what materials I'm using. So we're going to remix the color that we had here. You know what? I should list out my colors, shouldn't I? Titanium white, burnt umber, alizarin permanent, cadmium red medium, yellow ochre, sap green, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. Let's not be lazy. I should mention the colors, right? Okay, so for the flesh color, what we're going to look at is just a flat shape, and we're going to look at the average color. And a good way to do that is to kind of blur your eyes at the image. So remember yesterday, we mixed up that color with just white, red, and yellow ochre, and we basically have it back. So as my medium, I'm just using 1 part stand oil to 4 parts mineral spirits, simply because I'm not worried about when this is going to dry. So this is pretty close to the flesh color that I would want. I'd say maybe a little of a deeper pink shade to it. So I'm going to throw in some alizarin permanent, titanium white, sap green to neutralize the warmth, burnt umber. So it's going to be very complex color, just one shape of color. That is a little closer. So now remember I said that it might be, or it will be easier to work over top of this value study. I'll show you why. And I think this is a good idea for value study, is to have for color studies, to have a dry value study to work over. Yep, you can do that. So I have paper towel, just subtracted the color I didn't like. Now, isn't that neat? And I think this is about the shape that I want. And I think this is about the color that I want. That's what I should have said. Just a simple color. Now, we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to address the background color first. So here's the color that I had for the portrait. Now again, I would really recommend you watch yesterday's video, which was on the color study for the portrait on its own. So that's kind of too brown now in comparison to these blues. So I'm going to mix right onto this, and I'm going to use ivory black, titanium white, sap green. I want it to be a little bit greenish, but that is too green, so burnt umber. Once I figure out this color, I'm going to fill the background with it. What do you think? Dark greenish. It's kind of like a neutral green. And don't worry, I won't forget about the gradient, meaning the light transition from light to dark. A little bit more burnt umber. Let's look at color spots right now. So let's look at this spot of color. It's a very kind of a complex green. Don't want it to be like an olive green either. So ivory black. I think it's getting a little better. And of course, I'm aware that the transparency of the paint is affecting the way that the color looks. There are many ways to do color study. For me, I just want to get the color down, so I'm not worried if I'm working over top of a gray underpainting. I just want to get the color. All right, so I think that's a good color for the background. So I'm just going to go ahead and cover the rest of it now. Though it may be hard to distinguish, I think that's about the color that I would want for the background. So let's go ahead and start to add in something for the hair. So I'm going to work on this area of the palette. So Alizarin permanent. So we don't want it to be brown, though her hair is a little brownish. So a little bit of burnt umber, Alizarin permanent, ultramarine blue, to give kind of like a dark lavenderish tint, as opposed to just generically brown. A little bit of ivory black, just to bring down the saturation. A little bit more ivory black. We're going to sneak in some warmth into this area here. And remember, in the color study for the portrait, we made this shape a little bit warmer in comparison to the coolness, a little bit of ultramarine blue of these shapes here. And yes, I am mixing the colors directly onto each other on the palette. It helps cut back on the saturation, I think. So I'm going to think about a color mass for the sweater. So I'm going to go ahead and get a different brush here. All right, so I'm going to use this pinkish region of the palette and just throw what was already on there. And yes, I know you can see the transparency. You can see the underpainting, but I think that that kind of helps. The underpainting I'm referring to the value study as the underpainting for the color study. I think that's kind of a neat trick, don't you think? All right, so we're just focused on the color right now. So I think that might be a bit too red. So I'm gonna neutralize it a little bit with burnt umber. So that's a little better. Now the value is much darker than the flesh tone, at least than that flesh tone. I think even darker than we had in the value study. So the value study is actually helping us out quite a bit here. So what we didn't see in the value study, we're now seeing in the color study. Isn't that neat? So I think that's about all right for the sweater. Maybe I could make it pinker. A little bit of ultramarine blue. Alizarin permanent. I think that's all right. So the next thing is going to be the shadow. This shadow here. And I'm going to push it cooler than I see it. So I'm going to use ultramarine blue into this little region of paint. Now the reason I'm pushing it bluer, some of you may know, because I mentioned a similar thing yesterday in the color study for the portrait. I like to push warm and cool in sneaky ways. So I'm being very sneaky about it. So I'm sneaking in some coolness into this shadow to contrast with the warmness here. All right, so now for the hands, I'm going to combine these two color shapes. And we're going to get something very similar to the face, but a little bit darker. So that's pretty much the color for the face, just about. So let's make it darker with burnt umber. Now burnt umber will cool it down and make it darker. So let's see. First, let's erase that. Now let's see what this new color looks like. I think the value is still too light. So erase it. Keep on trying. More burnt umber. Let's throw in some more Alizarin permanent. Now that looks a little closer, but probably a bit too earthy. So we're almost there. Erase it. So we're going to use a little tiny bit of cadmium red medium and a little bit of this color, very tiny now. There. I think that's the color shape that I want for the hands. And I'm just going to group the hands together into just a one shape. You know, in color study, we're allowed to do this. Just kind of flatten everything out. It's all good. We don't have to worry about the drawing one bit. We're just looking at these large shapes of color in relation to one another. And I would never say that about a painting that I'm actually trying to develop. Never. This is a completely separate exercise. Don't confuse this with actually creating a painting. No, no, no. This is a way to study it. And you know what? I think the portrait now, or the face, can get a little darker. So let's subtract this. So let's compare two areas of color that are very similar to one another. This one and this one. So obviously this one has to be lighter than this one because it's just facing the light more in general. But what I had before, so let's use the hand first. I'm going to show you a neat trick. So let's use the hand first. So imagine there are two shapes in your color study that look very similar in color. Make them similar. Make them the same exact color. All right, so we have made them the same exact color, literally taking right from the palette. Now the difference is in value, but also in chroma. So this needs to be lighter and it needs to be pinker. Before it was too light. So let's use what we had before. This area on the palette was the same area that we mixed the original shade. So that looks a little bit lighter and a little bit pinker, and all it is a combination of two puddles. Excuse me. It's a combination of two puddles that were already existing on the palette. So now we can go in and make these value and color shifts with great facility. Very simple. See, now this is lighter than this. But now it's not that much brighter. Now I know in the photo reference the face is blasted. Okay, I know that the face is extremely light in the photo reference, but this is a color study. This is intended to get the effect that I want, not just trying to copy the photograph. One of the comments I saw earlier today was talking about the differences between the painting and the photo reference. So in the underpainting, let me first get a color for the jeans, then I'll talk about this. So let's use the background color, mixing right on top of it. So we added a little bit of ultramarine blue, which is telling the viewer that this is close to this, but it's more blue. So that's about all right. So anyway, the differences between the painting and the photo reference. So now I don't have the underpainting in this shot, but the underpainting for the larger painting we're working on, there are some obvious differences in the drawing. I didn't copy the drawing exactly, and there are some differences in the tonal arrangement. That is, I made the background a little bit darker in the underpainting, as you recall, and I made the background, I made some value adjustments from the photo reference, some value adjustments, in the underpainting that differed from the photo reference, just because I didn't like them on the photo reference. And in fact, I can explain them here. So the dark green that you're seeing here does not exist on the photo reference. This color subtlety from this to this, does not exist on the photo reference. The photo reference kind of overexposes and flattens certain areas. So instead of copying, what we're doing is interpreting the visual information. So I think that flat shape is about good for the jeans. Now the next shape that I want to think about is the cast shadow of the chair. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this brush a little bit with my odorless mineral spirits. Now this is greenish, and I don't want to just generically throw the shadow red. Though I want it to be a little more red, I'm going to use a combination of ultramarine blue and alizarin permanent just to sneak the red in there. See that? See, that on its own is too red. So we're going to use a little bit of ivory black, trying to be as sneaky as we can to push the effect of light but not be overly cheesy with it either, meaning complementary colors everywhere and making them obvious that they're complementary colors. Rather, we want to sneak them in there. Putting in that dark shape there. I'm noticing that the value is off, so let's just get some of this. You can mix directly onto the painting like this as well. Let's just soften that little edge there. It's all right if we get some paint onto the chair. All right, so that looks a lot better now for this dark shape. Isn't this just a neat way to do a color study? I don't know. Let me know. What do you think? Do you like doing the color study right on top of the value study? All right. So I think that that's pretty good for that dark. Now it's not very specific. We'll make that shadow much more specific in the actual painting. Next thing I want to do is address a very tricky color now, which is going to be the chair. Now the chair is going to be very tricky because honestly to me it looks gray. The local color of this chair is white, but it looks gray because it's just not in direct light. Now the highlights are in direct light, but just not the chair. So rather than just generically making it gray or generically making it, I don't know, like a yellow or something, what I'm going to do is test some colors out. So I'm going to take some colors directly from my palette. And so that is too dark. Paper towel, just erase it. Titanium white. This is, by the way, a different brush. I keep switching brushes rather than having to clean them all the time. So this is something that's very close to the flesh tone. It's not quite bright yellow, and it's a little bit cooler. So what I did was this color right there, I added titanium white to raise the value and to make it cooler. I think that's getting closer, but I think it needs to be a little bit cooler. So erase it, try again. A little bit of, okay, so we got three things we could do. Sap, Ultra or Ivory? Which one? Ooh, which one would you use? So let's be safe. Let's be safe. Let's use Ivory. Just a tiny bit of it though. Tiniest bit, tiniest bit. I think that's almost there, almost there. So I'm going to use, rather than erase it, I'm going to use a little bit of Ultra, just the tiniest bit now. You know what? Forget it. Erase it. All right, let's try it again. There we go. I think that's much better. Now, I'm not trying to color match with the photo reference. I'm trying to get a color that just works with this arrangement of color shapes. And what do I mean by works? I mean that I want this to be warmer, nowhere near as warm as this. I want this to be cooler, nowhere near as cool as this. I want this to be just in between all of that. And I'm aware that the underpainting is showing, that the underpainting is having some influence, but that's okay. What I'm trying to do is just get the color arrangement however I can get it. And we're just going to kind of glaze it onto the underpainting. Very tiny adjustment in the color. Now there are certain areas, such as, let's take this right here. This area on the chair that of course it's getting darker because it's facing away from the light. But I'm not trying to render anything. But I'm just going to put that in there because I just kind of feel like it. Darker, cooler. Just using some of this. Now that's too warm, so let's use a little bit of ultramarine blue, but not terribly concerned about that. So you know what, let's just get rid of that. Getting distracted here. So another thing I should note, like I said yesterday, the challenge in creating a color study, at least for me, let me know if it's the same for you, is getting kind of involved with the painting and wanting it to be a painting. And that's just not what this is about. This is a color study that's meant to give me an understanding of all of the color shapes in relation to one another. The emphasis is much more into this than this. How to get these color arrangements to work in relations, getting them all to work in relation to one another. So I think that's pretty much the value scheme that I want for this painting. So I hope that this video helps you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you again in 24 hours.